So I'm going to go over how to run a t-test in Excel. And first we're going to start with independent samples. So I have some data here from patients with Alzheimer's, and the patients were randomized to one of two groups. Group 1 received just visuals, and Group 2 received visuals and verbal rehearsals. And we want to see if there's a difference between the two groups and if one group did better than the other group or not. So in this case, my samples are totally independent because I have 60 people that were put into two different groups that received two different treatments, and what happened to one group has no impact on the other group. So these are completely independent samples. So the next thing I need to figure out with a t-test is whether I'm going to use equal variances or unequal variances. I need to look at whether the variability in the groups is roughly the same or if one group has a lot larger variability among their scores. So I can do that by checking the variance of the two groups. So let me do variance for group 1. And I don't need to type these into the Excel spreadsheet. It just helps me remember what I did and keep track of it. So let me go ahead and figure out the variance, which I can do using an insert function. So I'll look for variance. And this is a sample, not a population. So I need to make sure I check the variance for the sample. And let me tell it where that data is. So there's my variance for group 1. And let me just do the same thing for group 2. And the variance for sample is right at the top because it's the last test that I used. So it'll keep a memory of what you've done recently, and the most recent test will be right there at the top. So here's my variance for group 2. And if I compare those two, the variance for group 2 is 4.25 and the variance for group 1 is 11.7. So it's almost triple. They're still relatively small numbers, but my rule of thumb on assuming equal variance is if the variance of one group is not more than double the variance of the other group. And here the variance is almost triple because I have 4 and then almost 12. So I'm going to have to assume unequal variance for this test. Now that I've done that, I can move into the t-test using the functions. So let me click into the cell where I want my results to go and go into here, and t-test is showing up because I used it fairly recently. If it's not showing up for you, just search for it in that box. So I need to select my data array, so let me tell it where the data for group 1 is. And then the same thing for group 2. I can also manually type it in here, but I usually just like to select the data from, just go to the spreadsheet and select it. So now I need to decide how many tails my test has. It tells me down here it can have either a 1 or a 2 for the value in that box. So I would do a two-tailed test or non-directional if I'm just looking for a difference between the groups, but I'm not going to specify what that difference is. In this case, I might want to see if group 2 did better than group 1. They're getting an additional intervention, and I might want to see if we're justifying that additional cost and time, or if we're really getting about the same results from the two groups. And if I don't specify the direction of the difference, it could be that group 2 actually did worse. Maybe too much time in the intervention was just overwhelming for the patients or something. So I want to do a directional hypothesis because it would be more meaningful to me to actually know that answer. So I'm going to choose one tail, and then here I need to tell it what type of t-test. So I have the option to do a paired t-test, which would also be the same as dependent samples, or matched samples or matched pairs, but it's where the two groups are related. I also have an option for 2 sample with equal variance and 2 sample with unequal variance. Well, this is why I needed to look at the variance before, and I figured out that the variance is quite different. So I'm going to assume unequal variance. So I type a 3 here. And then I'm going to click on OK. And I get an answer here, which is my one-tailed p-value. So my one-tailed p-value is 0.4457, which is actually quite high if I'm comparing that to my significance level that I set before the test. So my significance level, let's say, was 0.05. I actually don't want the equations. Let me go back here. Just a minute. I just want to put in the alpha symbol for significance. And again, I don't need to type all this in. It's just to help me keep on track with what I'm doing. So my significance level is 0.05. So if I compare this p-value that I got from the t-test functions to my significance level of 0.05, it's quite a lot higher. So that would tell me that I'm going to fail to reject the null hypothesis. Had a little pause you could answer the question first yourself there. Get rid of this equation, actually. I accidentally put that in when I was doing the significance. So the next way I'm going to run this is using the data analysis tool pack. So I'm going to go to the data tab and come over here to data analysis. And then I'm going to choose t-test, and I have a few different options. And I have two sample with unequal variance, which we already figured out. So I'm going to click OK. And then I need to tell it where my data range is. And I'm going to go ahead and select the labels with the data range. When we have more complicated tests, it helps with the interpretation to do that. But I need to tell it that I selected the label. So make sure that you check this if you highlight that first box with the label. And then I'm going to change the output range so that it's going to be somewhere next to my data. So put it here. And here I have 0.05 for my significance level, and that's good. That's what I'll use for this test. The other box that I have here is the hypothesized mean difference. If I have an idea of what I expect that difference to be, I can put something there, but most of the time you're just going to leave that blank. It'll run just fine with leaving it blank. You do not need to put something in that box. So everything looks good. I'll double check my settings and click OK. And here I get my answers for the t-test 2 sample with unequal variance. So it gives me my variance here, my mean here, and it gives me my p-values, my one-tail and two-tail. We already talked about how we're doing a one-tail test, so that's the one that I would look at. As you can see, you get quite a bit of information from the test from the analysis tool pack. So in this case, that would definitely be my preference. I wanted to show you how to use the functions so that you know how to do it if you need to know how to do it. But it would definitely be my preference here to do the analysis tool pack because you also get your mean, your degrees of freedom, the t-test statistic, and it gives you the critical value if you wanted to use that method to determine whether or not to reject the null hypothesis. So that would definitely be my preference. But now you know how to do those with both. And on the data that I provided you, the second tab has the answers. I went ahead and put equal and unequal variance just in case you ran the test that way. And you can see the answers are actually quite similar to each other. The p-values are slightly different. And if I went more decimal points out, this test statistic might be a little bit different. But the answers will be pretty close if you don't have a lot of variability in your data, whether you do the equal or unequal variance. But when you get more variability, then there'll be more discrepancy between those answers. So you've got the answers here for you, so you can try to run it yourself and see how it goes.